Less than a minute. I'll start at exactly top of the hour, which is 40 seconds away. Okay, 3, 2, 1. So hello and welcome. I'm really glad that you were able to come out today. And I also like to thank the Moscow Business College for hosting this. They're a great institution, great bunch of people to work with. This presentation will be on demand. So if you miss any of this or you have to leave early, or if you'd like to see it again, which I strongly recommend, that you contact them and get a link and go watch this presentation again. Today, we're going to be talking about innovative thinking for business. And it's innovation. We know that innovation is what set companies aside. Look at all the companies around the world that have prospered and grown. Apple hit the $1 trillion share value. It's the highest amount of value of any corporation in the history of the world. Why? Because Apple has been synonymous with innovation and creativity. Everybody today now knows social media tools. Everybody's comfortable with how to market your business and how to communicate using digital, social, and traditional marketing. The only thing that's going to set us aside, either as a corporation or as an individual, is how we use those tools, the innovation, the creativity that we put into those tools. So let's get creative. Let's actually start this. Here's my bio. You don't have to read this. You'll get a third of the way through the list and your eyes will start to bleed. It's real small. But I just want to let you know that the reason that I was chosen is because I've built 14 companies in my career. I invented the first computer to save a human life. I have 14 inventions in the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., 30,000 of my personal papers there. 14 inventions in the Computer History Museum, 3 patents. So I really love innovation, and you're going to see that by the end of this presentation, and I hope that you're going to get as excited over innovation as I am. Let's start with a couple of definitions. Let's first define what innovation actually is. The definition is the action or process of innovating a new method, idea, or product. I know that that doesn't help, so let's dive a little bit deeper into this. Let's look at creativity, the use of the imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. Okay, now we're starting to get there. If you look at innovation and creativity together, it's coming up with a unique idea, something the world has never seen before, and it's actually producing something out of that idea, making that idea tangible. And then that's where we get to the third definition, invention, the action of inventing something, typically a process, device, or a design. And again, let's take a look at Steve Jobs and what he did in his career and all the different innovative products that he brought to market. He would start with this inspiration, this idea of let's do an MP3 player. But then creativity got into it, and he created that touch dial, and he made the product sexy. And then he actually produced that product and sold it. And that's what we need to do with our innovation. Come up with the idea, figure out how we're going to do it, and implement that idea. That means either for your company or even you as an individual. If you're looking for a job, it's creativity that's going to set you aside from everybody else. Let's talk about the things that I'm going to talk about and what I'm not. I'm not going to tell you that by the end of this presentation that you're going to be a Michelangelo or another Steve Jobs. But I am telling you that if you pay attention to this and what you learn in this presentation, if you practice it, you will be more creative and more innovative. And that almost always translates to more income, more money, better bottom line. So pay attention. Remember, that being innovative and creative, it's a skill that needs to be honed. It's like riding a bicycle or playing a piano. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the better you'll become at it. Now, the presentation is broken down into three parts. One, we're going to talk about how your brain messes with your head. Yeah, it does. Sometimes answers are right in front of us, but we can't see them because of the way our brain works. The middle part is I'm actually going to give you a formula how to do this, and that's what everybody loves. Is there a simple process? Yeah, it's a three-step process that'll help you practice the art of being innovative and creative. And then I'm going to show you some examples. They're all practical examples. Some of them are very small ideas. These are just ideas that I come up with almost every single day. And I want to show them to you because they don't have to be the next iPad. It could be something very, very simple. And I recommend that you start with something simple and then practice and move on to the bigger ideas. So let's talk about your brain. Yeah, your brain in the back. You know who I'm talking about. You. Oh no, on that side. Your brain. I want you to take a look at this. Just look at it for a moment. What do you see there? A lot of people see a black swan. A lot of people see a ninja star. A lot of people see the Batman insignia or something like that. And if you're seeing that, that's normal. The reason is that we have been trained to interpret information, written information, visual information, that the information resides in black on a white background. And there's the problem. Now, if you saw a big giant question mark, okay, then you're out of the box. You're thinking differently than most people. We're not trained to see and identify information white on a black background. Think how terrible that would be if you try to read a book and all the pages were black with white letters, or a newspaper and all the paper was black with white letters. It'd really be terrible. So our brain has been trained since we were children to always recognize the information in black. So sometimes seeing this question mark isn't really apparent. Our brain is messing with our heads. The information is in front of us, but because of the way our brain has been trained, the way the brain is comfortable in identifying information, we simply can't see that information. Crazy, huh? I want you to take a look at this diagram here for a second. There's two squares. There's the A square and the B square. Now I want you to say to yourself, which do you think is the darker square? Is A darker than B, or is B darker than A? Just take a look at it for a second. I mean, it's pretty obvious which one is actually darker than the other. Or is it? Look at that. Your brain's messing with your head again. They're actually exactly the same color. But because we see the green cylinder casting a shadow, we believe that B is actually a white square simply in a shadow. But in fact, they're exactly the same color. So if you were trying to solve a problem and you needed to identify the difference between these colors or see a solution in front of you that was subtle, your brain often prevents you from seeing that solution. So if you're more aware of how your brain blocks your ability to solve problems, then it's easier for you to overcome that block. Now here's another one. Which car is larger? The one in the foreground, the one in the middle, or the one in the background in the center of the screen? Think about it for a while. Take a good look at them. There's three different cars there, actually similar cars. So the question is, which one is larger? You know, the truth of the matter is they're identical. Yeah, if I take that car that's in the center and move it to the front and put it alongside of the one in the lower right-hand corner, you're going to find that they're exactly the same size. And if you don't believe me, these slides will be available from my website, lonsafko.com, and I'll talk more about that at the very end of the presentation when we do Q&A. Print out the slides and compare them. Those are identical sized cars. But because our brain sees perspective, it knows that if that car is further away from the one in the foreground, it has to be significantly larger to appear this way, when in fact it's exactly the same. So once again, our brain is tricking us into not seeing the solution. The better we understand that, the easier it is for us to overcome those shortcomings. Here's another question. This is a bus. Let's call it a school bus. 100% of young children will be able to answer this question, and nearly no adults can. If this bus was parked at the curb and it pulled away, which way would it go? To the right or to the left? Which way would that bus go if it was parked next to the curb? Here's the answer. In America, at least, or where we drive on the right side of the road, it has to move to the left. The reason is that if you see only windows, there's no door. So the front of the bus has to be on the left side of the object. School kids recognize that immediately. Adults, somehow we lost that. And that's also part of the problem with creativity, is where did it go? When we were children, 98% of fifth graders say that they are creative. Less than 2% of high school kids feel that they're creative. How did we go from almost 100% to less than 2% in just that short amount of time? And the reason is it's been taught out of us. We were taught to comply, fit in, do as the other students do. And who taught us? The people that we trusted the most. Our parents, our grandparents, police, the church. They all believed, and we can't blame them for this, that if we conformed and we fit in, that we would probably have a better and more successful life because we wouldn't rock the boat or cause problems. So our parents have been teaching us not to be creative, but in fact to fit in. So the answer again, the bus could only actually move to the left because there's no door. Now I want you to look at this. Stare at that image just for a second, and I want you to tell me, how many black dots do you see? Count them up. Oh, you're saying that they're changing from black to white and then white to black? No, this is not a GIF. This isn't an animated image. This is a still JPEG. So you're still seeing black and white dots changing. Yeah, you are. Here's another way that your mind, or in this case, your body, actually deceives you. They're white dots. When you look at an image like this, the light reflects off the image and goes directly into your eye, passes through your iris, and it hits the retina on the back of your eye. The retina is made up of cones and rods. Cones see color, rods see black and white. So as your eye is moving across this image, the cones are registering a large amount of black and not so much white, because there isn't very much white except for the little dots themselves. They are white, by the way, not black. The time that it takes for the nerve synapses to clear the chemical of what it's seeing and refresh itself to see a new image is the amount of time right now that you are actually seeing those black dots. That's kind of cool, isn't it? For the amount of time that you see the black dots, that's how long it takes each and every one of your little nerves inside your eye to get rid of the chemical, refresh itself, and send a new refreshed image to your brain. Pretty cool. And if you look over on the left, it's usually between 10 and 100 milliseconds. And everybody's a little bit different. So some people will see the black dots longer than others. But isn't that kind of weird that if you were looking for white dots and you saw black dots, but in fact they were white dots, and that was the solution that you were looking for, it'd be pretty much impossible for you to see it because your body is actually tricking you into seeing something different. Kind of weird, huh? Elephant, regular elephant, except I want you to count his legs or her legs. How many legs does the elephant have? And the answer is two, too many. I wanted to show this to you because we recognize, human beings recognize patterns. As soon as we see something, we jump to conclusions. And often we have to do that. If we see a large metal rectangular object approaching us and it's getting larger and we're about to step off the curb, there's a good chance that it could be a bus. So you don't step off the curb, or otherwise you could get hit by that bus. So your brain has to constantly make split-second decisions on what we're actually looking at. In this case, as soon as you see the elephant, okay, yeah, it's an elephant. Cool, let's move on. But if you take a closer look, you'll see that the drawing is deceiving you from actually seeing the number of legs. But you probably, if I didn't bring it up and just went to the next slide, your brain would never register anything wrong with this because it's jumped to a conclusion and prevented you from seeing the solution again. And in this case, the number of legs. Kind of weird, right? Now, these are called optical illusions, but I wanted to start this presentation by showing you how it's very difficult sometimes for us to solve problems because our own brain and sometimes our own body is preventing us from seeing those solutions. The more we're aware of this, the more sensitive we are to it, the better we are at overcoming this problem. Let's talk about the secret formula, and that's something called the 3 C's. I was asked back in the year 2000 by a head of a speakers bureau who said, Lon, you're the most innovative person I've ever met. Can you do a presentation on it and teach everybody what the actual process is? I said, sure, give me a couple of weeks. Well, it took me 3 years. Yeah, I'm not kidding. 3 years to actually figure out what I do all the time, what the actual process that goes on inside of my head. And I boiled it down to this, the 3 C's, because I want to keep it simple so that everybody can understand how to do this. This is really the most important part of the entire presentation. The 3 C's of innovative thinking. First of all, collect. We're going to collect information. We're going to collect information from every place that we can. One thing that's really important, that you may even want to write this down if you want to be creative. If you're looking for a solution, especially a business solution, don't look in your industry. If a solution existed to a big problem in your industry, you would have already known about it. So don't look there. Look in other areas. Go on the internet, type in keywords, read blogs, read newspaper articles based on keywords. Look at websites that have nothing to do with what you do or what you think the problem is, but based only on keywords. Let me give you an example. Henry Ford, who made the first mass-produced automobile, was accredited with creating the assembly line. In fact, he didn't create the assembly line. That assembly lines were used for years before he did. He just perfected it and applied it to the largest manufacturing project ever. And at the time, he had one car and 30 engineers. And each of those different 30 engineers would work on the car a little at a time, and until eventually they built that car. So it would take 30 engineers 1 month to make one car. And he knew that that wasn't going to happen. He knew that if the car, the automobile, was going to be successful, that it would have to be mass produced, not one each month. Nobody could afford that. And that was the biggest problem. Mass production would drive the cost down. So he contacted Oldsmobile Brothers and Chevrolet. And yeah, by the way, all of the names that Porsche had contacted her dad, all the big names in automobiles in the early days were actually the people who invented them. And he looked throughout his industry, and everybody was doing it the same way. One car, 30 engineers, 1 month. So completely frustrated, he took his lunch pail out to a potato farm in Michigan, sat under a tree and thought about it. And as he was doing that, the truck was picking up potatoes. And as it dug the potatoes would roll up the conveyor belt and drop down into the truck. He looked at that for a second. He says, wait a minute. If I replace the potatoes with a car and I eliminated the engineers and just had one person doing one task, which is really unskilled labor, and the car went to the assembler down the line, I could mass produce a car. And yes, the truth is every 60 seconds, not once a month, a new car came off the assembly line. So he found one of the biggest solutions in manufacturing history on a potato farm in Michigan. So that's what I'm talking about. Collect. Gather as much information as you can. The number two, calculate. The calculate part, there's not a lot you can do except keep feeding that part of your brain. There's the right side of your brain, there's the left side of your brain. The left side handles analytics, text, numbers, where the right side handles ideas, concepts, colors. It's the right side of your brain that is actually going to develop those new ideas. That's where they all hatch. That's where they exist. Now, the trick is once you have thought of these really good ideas, and we all do it, it happens to all of us, we come up with great ideas. Your right side of your brain now has to communicate that to the left side of your brain. And that gets us down to communicate. The communicate part is you have to provide an environment where the right side of your brain can actually communicate with the left side of your brain. And the secret to that is quiet. Let's talk some more about that. Collect. I'm going to say it again because you have to hear it twice, read it once, 3 times in order to remember it and to understand it. Collect. We're going to collect information from as many widespread sources as possible and keep gathering that information because your brain is going to treat that information like puzzle pieces and eventually see which pieces fit. Now, when we do that, there was a scientist who was studying this. He said, be eyesy, use your eyes, not nosy, but eyesy. Creative people are expert noticers. They pay attention. They have developed highly abilities for visual foraging, spotting, gathering, utilizing. So look around, listen, be very sensitive to all the information around you. You'll know that this is working when something that's called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon happens. And what that means is, have you ever really wanted something, a new car or a new purse or something, and now you think about that all the time and you want to do it, but you can't pull the trigger. Maybe you don't have enough money or the timing isn't right. But now you start to notice more and more people that have that car, truck, purse, new smartphone, whatever it is. You start getting very sensitive. And now it's turning up everywhere you look. That's called the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. What that means is that you're paying such close attention and gathering so much information. Now you've trained your brain to actually spot that product or that idea, and your brain just locks in on it like we did with the elephant. It does pattern recognizing. So you know that you're being successful with your gathering when you experience this phenomenon. Now, another way of looking at the problem, because you have to really study what the problem is. Now, 2 things. It doesn't have to be a big problem. It can be a teeny problem. And it doesn't have to be a problem at all. When Steve Jobs created the MP3 player, he wasn't solving a problem because none of us knew that we needed to have an MP3 player. So he wasn't solving a problem. He was coming up with a really creative idea about something that nobody had ever seen before and really didn't need. And then Jobs worked his magic to convince us that we had to have it. So when you're studying a problem, I sometimes use what's called the 5 W's. Now, the who, what, where, when, why, and how. Yeah, there's an H in there as well. The 5 W's allows us to fully look at all of the aspects of a situation. It was actually invented by the New York Times back in the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s, when stories were happening in each of the different areas inside of New York. But the reporter couldn't go into an Italian neighborhood if he wasn't Italian, or didn't want to go into an Irish neighborhood or a Chinese neighborhood if that wasn't their ethnicity. Thank you. So what they would do is they would get these kids, usually 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, and pay them a nickel to go in and to get the story. And they'd ask them, get the who, what, where, when, why, and how. If you can answer those questions, I am guaranteed to have all the information that I need to actually build out the story. And then they would come back and give them that information, and they would get their nickel. And they were called cub reporters. Cub, that's where that term came from. cub, like little baby bears. So they were cub reporters. But we can use that today. Use that. Who does it affect? When does it happen? How? What are the circumstances? Look, answer as deeply as you can those 5 W's in the H, and it will help you subconsciously as well as consciously fully define and understand the situation that surrounds the problem that you're trying to solve. That makes sense? Okay, calculate. Again, sometimes all we can do is just keep feeding that information in. That's all we do is we feed it in, because when your brain has enough information, you'll start to experience the Bader-Meinhof phenomenon. Then it starts putting the puzzle pieces together, and then your right side of your brain, your subconscious part of your brain, will then tell you when it's ready. Now, communicate is really important. Communicate means turn off the noise. Stop the noise. Turn your iPhone off. Turn your music off. The reason is that your right brain has these great ideas. It's trying to move these conceptual ideas over to the conscious side of your brain, but the conscious side of your brain is constantly being inundated with information. Put your smartphone down. You're not that important. I'm sorry. If you don't look at your smartphone for a day, the world will not come to an end. 5 o'clock, I turn off my smartphone and I do not turn it back on until 7. I leave it in my office. I don't carry it with me. I don't want to be bothered. I want quiet time with myself. Get away from TV. Get away from any distraction. When you're listening to music, your conscious side of your brain locks onto the rhythm, or it's listening and lip syncing the words to whatever that song is. When it's following the rhythm and it's singing along with the music, how is the right brain ever going to get a chance to communicate those ideas? Now, I'm going to prove that what I'm telling you is true. When do you get your best ideas? Think about it. Gonna have a little sip of coffee while you're thinking of that? Yeah, in the shower, when you're exercising, when you're jogging, when you're asleep and you wake up in the middle of the night, right? That's when the best ideas come to you. Why? Because your left brain is shut down. If you're in the shower, you probably are not going to get hit by a bus. If you're laying in bed asleep, you're probably not going to get eaten by a lion. So your left brain says, okay, I'm off duty. I'm going to sleep. Now your right brain says, okay, shh, listen, here's this really great idea that I came up with, but you haven't shut up all day. So I'm going to give it to you now. If you provide those times where you aren't locked in to paying attention to everything around you, actually consciously make time for that, the answers will come to you. So here's the challenge. The next time you're in your car, turn the music off. I want dead silence. Whether you're going work to home, home to school, wherever you're going. For that one trip, I want dead silence. And I just want you to think. And you're going to be shocked on how many great ideas have been in your head all this time, but you never gave the opportunity to listen to them. I'm going to give you some examples of innovation. These are silly examples. These are ones that I come up with all the time. I have a file cabinet drawer filled with these kinds of silly ideas. Some are silly, some actually changed my life and made it easier. But the reason I'm giving them to you is to show you that anybody can be creative. We all are, if we follow this process. Let's take a look at the garden hose. Everybody has one. And we put it on the holder, the way you see in the photograph on the left. And then we pull it off that holder, and we wonder why it's all kinked up and snarled and twisted. Well, because we did it. We twisted it. We spun it around and spun it around, and every time we spun it around, and then you take it off, and then you do it again, and the heat and the cold put those twists into the hose, and when we take it off, we can't understand why it's all tangled up and kinking, because we did it. To solve this, I used the 5 W's. When does it happen? Why does it happen? Who does it happen to? How does it happen? And what I realized is that we were causing the problem. I was causing the problem by twisting the hose as I put it. Oh, it looks pretty. It looks really pretty. So then I decided, okay, what if I took the hose and got all the twists out of it and was able to put it back on the rack without twisting it? And that's what I did on the right. Yeah, it doesn't look as nice. I simply drape it back and forth. But you know what that did for me? That gave me the opportunity that when I take it off, there's not a single twist. So do you realize that for 20 years, I've never had a twisted hose? How cool is that? Every time I use the garden hose, I am grateful that I figured this out. But it's such a simple idea, but it makes my life easier. And that's how we can solve anything from the smallest problems like a hose all the way up to a major problem at work. Here's another thing, and I know that you guys have this problem when the temperature gets colder like it does now. You guys are around 0 degrees Celsius. You got the heaters on, you got the furnace, you're creating heat in the house, and that dries the house out. It dries out the air. And how many people here during the winter, when everything gets really dry, you get nosebleeds? Yeah, I grew up in upstate New York, very cold in the winter, and always had nosebleeds. It was terrible because the air was so dry, it would hurt my nose. So I thought there's got to be an easy way to add water. Well, some people put coffee cans or pots of water on the radiator, but I didn't think that that was a good solution. So I came up with this Humidivent. It's a little plastic device. You fill it with water and you set it on the floor vent. And as the air blows through it, it sucks the water out of the container in the front and it humidifies the air. It's dishwasher safe. It's plastic. It can be produced inexpensively. And if you wanted to, you could put some essential oils in there and make the room smell nice. But I mean, see how simple the solution is? If you want to add water to a vent of hot air, just make a little device that the air passes over the water and humidifies the room. Kind of interesting, right? Say yes or you'll hurt my feelings. Here's one that my wife asked me for. She, not that I'm sexist, sometimes I mop, but she's better at it. Us men are not very good at most domestic duties, and our spouses are the first to tell us. So when she mops the floor, what do you do with the wet mop when you're done? Huge problem. If you put it in the bucket, like you see on the left, it sits in there and the bacteria grows and it starts to smell. And it doesn't dry out because it's stuck in this plastic bucket. So that's not going to work. If you put the mop on the floor, that's even worse because now all the water goes on the floor and it stains the floor and it smells. That's not good. And if you try to stand it on end, it all drips down the handle and it makes a mess. So my wife says, can you solve that problem? So I thought about it. Yeah, I took the same bucket, which we get at the dollar store, which is very, very inexpensive, and I cut a V shape in it, and I put one screw and I screwed it to the wall. Now, when she's done, she takes the mop, drops the head in the bucket, lets the handle hang down. The head of the mop drips down out of the fibers into the bucket so that both the head and the bucket dry very quickly so there's no bacteria, no smell, and the mop dries very quickly, and it holds the mop in place. Look at that. Isn't that kind of an interesting solution? Very simple. It's like, why didn't I think of that? You can, and that's why I'm giving you these examples. Here's another one. You probably are just going through this now, raking leaves. How do you pick them up? You try to pick them up and put them in bags. What I do is I throw a tarp down and I rake the leaves onto the tarp. But then just by using this little hook and a piece of wood, which you can get at the local hardware store for about $1, you make a hook and then you can connect the grommets, the eyelets in the four corners of the tarp and pick it up and carry it. And then the leaves spill. So you can take it to where you're dumping the leaves, you can take it and put it into the trash. And if you have bigger items like branches, just hook one end of the tarp and then you can drag them to wherever you want to go. So for me, just by using a dollar store tarp, a hook and a piece of wood, it made cleaning up the leaves so much easier for me. I loved it. Simple solution, very inexpensive, but it's innovation that sets these ideas aside. My daughter, when she went to college, she worked for a restaurant chain called Outback Steakhouse. Sold steak. And they had a dress code that her earrings had to be smaller than 25-cent piece, a quarter. Now in the US, we have dollars, and a quarter of $1 is called a quarter, and it's a coin about this big around. The fashion at the time was very large hoop dangly things. And she really liked to be in fashion. She wanted to wear these. And she got in trouble a couple of times because the earrings were larger than a quarter. So I thought about it for a while and I made these earrings for her. A nickel and 2 dimes. That's 5 cents plus 10 cents plus 10, or 25. 25 is a quarter of our dollar. And they were dangly. But that wasn't the idea of the rule that the restaurant had. So she wore those and she said, these are not larger than a quarter. It turns out that they're exactly a quarter of a dollar. And she almost got fired and had to take them off. But I thought it was really funny. How do you create dangly earrings that are smaller than a quarter? Well, use 2 dimes and a nickel. Just another way of looking at things. The logo of my latest book, Innovative Thinking Bible, I use this. This was an idea that I came up with a really long time ago. Someone said to me, man, you are like a round peg in a square hole. I can get you in the hole, but you don't fit. You just never fit properly. And I was like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I am a round peg in a square hole. You can put me in the hole, but I don't fit properly. So I looked at that. That's the center image. But then I thought about it. What if you took that peg and turned it 90 degrees? Now that very, very same peg fits in perfectly because from looking at it from that angle, it is a square. Isn't that bizarre? Yeah, so that's just another example of looking at a problem and turning it around and finding a really simple solution that's right in front of us. I'm going to give you another example. A lot of people like tabletop fountains, little fountains that sit on your table and the water bubbles and you hear the white noise. That's called white noise of the water churning in the fountain. And it's relaxing. We all find that relaxing. A lot of people also like fish tanks. I had a fish tank for almost 20 years. Very relaxing. How come no one has ever thought to put a fountain and a fish tank together? How cool would it be if there was like this plastic cover that fit over the fish tank that actually was a landscape, like an island where the water could trickle down the side of a volcano and then go into the ocean, which is actually the fish tank. You get additional white noise, you get the aesthetics, you get the beauty of this tropical paradise waterfall. You got the pump anyway. You got the water anyway. And that actually helps purify and aerate the water, which is better for the fish. But I've never seen that before. Why not combine the two of them? Could be very inexpensive, and I think it would be a heck of a lot of fun. It's just a way of looking differently at the things that we see around us all the time, the way Henry Ford did. Trash can liners. I don't care how you try to match the liner to the can, it never works. You always end up with larger liners. So if you look at that trash can on the right side, if you take a soda can, some kind of a drink can, throw it in, you know what's going to happen. It's going to hit the bottom of the bag and it's going to pull the bag in. You throw an apple core, you throw anything in there and it's going to knock the bag in. Now you're going to bend down, pick the bag up, move it around. It was a real nuisance and it was just something that continuously bothered me. So I thought about it for a minute and I came up with what you see in the lower right. A couple of rubber bands just tied inside out with one paper clip. That way I can stretch it over any size can that I have and it would always hold the liner in place and the liner never falls into the can anymore. If it's a larger can, I simply add more rubber bands. If it's smaller, I use less and I just connect it with that paper clip. And you know what? About every 6 months or so, the rubber bands start to get old. Throw them in the garbage. You're right there anyway. Just make another one because it's free. What about shower heads? Everybody here use that type of a shower head? I really like that because you can reach hard to reach places and it is really good for rinsing your hair instead of trying to stand underneath it and do some kind of interpretive dance to make sure that the water gets on all your parts. So I like that. How come we never thought of taking similar to vacuum attachments, I'm not kidding you, and make them snap on the head of the shower? I would like that. I would like to be able to scrub with a soft bristle brush, especially on my back. In other places, it's hard to reach. What if you had a snap-on loofah or a snap-on one that had a automatic soap dispenser built into it, or any type of massaging or scrubbing attachment? And they're waterproof. They can just snap on and pop right off. No one's ever thought of that. That would really increase the usefulness of that shower head. But again, nobody thinks of looking at it that way. Here's another one: highway cones. If your car, my wife had a problem with a car. It was about a couple of years ago, and we had those little triangle things that sit in the road. But every time a truck would come by, it would blow it over. So I thought, boy, that's not a good idea. I'd love to get one of those big orange cones and put it in her trunk so that I knew that she was safe. But that didn't make sense either, because you don't want to carry a giant highway cone. So I thought, what is shaped like a highway cone that when it blows over, it can pop back up on its own? You remember those toys that, as a kid, where you could punch it and it would go over and then pop right back up? It's just a PVC, polyvinyl chloride. It's a plastic air inflated toy that has a little bit of sand in the bottom of it. What if you did the same thing with a highway cone? You made it reflective, you made it bright orange, it was inflatable, and it had a little bit of sand in the bottom. It could sit in your trunk. It's absolutely thin because it's compressed in a little plastic bag. But then when you needed it, it could blow up to 3 foot tall. And when a truck came by, it would blow it over and it would pop right back up. And you could manufacture them in China for probably 10 cents. They'd be that cheap. So I thought, why not? What if we did something like this? Very inexpensive. If you want to reuse them, you just open up the air valve, let the air out of it, put it back in your car. They'd be so cheap, you could probably throw them away with one-time use. But we never think of things this way. Just looking at it from a different perspective. You doing okay? Are you getting any ideas? Are you realizing that you can do this? You can be innovative. You can make money. You can solve problems for yourself personally and for your company. Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. My granddaughter came to visit. She was 8 years old at the time. This is a while ago. And if you know anything about 8-year-old kids, wow, they are just nonstop bags of energy running around. You have to keep them occupied. And one of the things kids love to do is to color. That keeps them busy for a really long time. So my wife went to the store, got a bunch of coloring books and some color crayons. And after breakfast, my granddaughter said, "Papa, I'd like to color a drawing for you." I said, "Oh, that'd be wonderful." I said, "If you do a really nice job, we'll put it up on the refrigerator and everybody will see it and you will be a hero." So, so we spent a couple of minutes looking at all the different options. Now, by the way, this is not it, and I'll tell you why here in a second. So she was getting ready to color, and she says, "I'm going to do a really good job for you." I said, "That's great." I said, "I'm excited to see what you're going to do." I said, "Can you do me a favor?" She goes, "Of course." I said, "When you draw, what I want you to do is not draw inside of the lines, draw outside. I want you to color outside of the lines." And she looked at me like, "Oh my gosh, what is wrong with this old man?" And my wife, of course, looked at me, because I do that with the kids all the time. I give them things that are impossible because I want to see what happens. What do they do? Do they just start to cry, or can they figure it out? I don't know. So coloring outside the lines, I thought was pretty weird. That's called backwards thinking. And sometimes backwards thinking, believe it or not, it's a technique and it will help you be more creative. So I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, she came to me, she says, "I finished it." And this is what she did. She took the brightest neon colored crayons, and along each of the black lines, she drew a very bright neon color. What happens is, it's like when you put red and blue side by side, it kind of vibrates in your eyes. This thing was amazing. I wish I had the original, but this is one that I duplicated. It was so brilliant, the neon color next to the black line with all the white space. It really looked like it was a neon sign. It looked like it was in motion, that it was moving. Absolutely fascinating. And we had it up in the refrigerator for so long that it eventually fell apart and we threw it away. But when I was putting this presentation together, I remembered that and I duplicated it. Here's the moral of the story. Sometimes you have to color outside of the lines. You have to use reverse thinking. You have to look at the problem from 180 degrees around, from the back of the problem or under it or above it. If you look at it differently, you'll see it different than the way everybody else sees it. Does that make sense? Give you one more of these. A friend of mine sold real estate. He sold homes. And he says, can you put together a marketing idea that would be creative? I said, I don't know. Let me give it a shot. So I thought about it. If you're buying a home, what are the biggest questions? Well, there's only one question. Can I afford it? How much home can I afford? We all know that if you ever bought a home or thought about buying a home or even know anybody who bought a home. How much home can I afford? And that's going to be based on how much do you have to borrow? The more you borrow, the higher the payment is. That determines what you can afford. Usually, for any given time period that you're looking for a house, the interest rate is going to be about the same during that period. So that's fixed. So really, the only thing that affects the payment is the amount that you borrow. So on the back of his business card, I created this table. Now, this is US dollars, but you can do it in any monetary value. And what you look over the left-hand side, and that's interest rates, 3%, 3.5, 4%. That's how much our bank mortgage institutions will charge for what you borrow. If you look across the top, you'll see different amounts in $50,000 increments of how much you're going to actually borrow. And then if you just cross-reference the two of those, you'll know what your monthly payment is. And if it's in between any of those numbers, you can estimate. But instantly, you can say, okay, if I borrow this amount at today's rate, this is what my payment is. Can I afford that? Now, I thought it was pretty innovative. He did too, and he put it on some business cards, and this was about 10 years ago. And I had lunch with him not too long ago, and he pulled out this wrinkly old business card, and it had that chart on the back. He says, do you remember that? I said, yeah, I do. He says, this wasn't one of my copies. This came from a client. A client used this to buy a house with me 10 years ago. The client was so impressed. He saved this business card for 10 years. He called me again last week, and I sold him another house because he kept my business card all that time. Oh my gosh, OMG. Isn't that what you want in marketing? A piece of marketing material that nobody's going to throw away, that is so valuable that they can keep it for 10 years? Yeah, and it was just looking at it from a different perspective. It was using the 5 W's. What's the most important thing? How much can I afford? That means monthly payment, and with a fixed interest rate, it simply means how much can I borrow. All right, now do you want to create a million idea, a $1 million idea, multi-million ruble idea? Yeah, we can do that. That's what we're going to do next. I'm going to take you through the steps, and I'm going to let you determine the answers. Okay, so the answer, absolutely, we can do this. Let me set it up. I was brought in to help the Port of San Diego, California, and San Diego International Airport, help them with their marketing and their image and to get the word out. And there wasn't much of a budget. It was a government institution. It takes a long time to get budgets approved. And so I didn't have very much resources. And I realized that they had to get out into the community. They had to connect with the community much better than they were doing. So literally, and this is absolutely true. It was 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. I had a dry erase pen and a whiteboard. And I asked these questions. Who do we want to go after to get the most marketing impact to the citizens in the geographic area? Well, kids. Now, why kids? Well, we know that when McDonald's first started, they did those habit trails, the play gyms where the kids can come and play. Kids loved it. I remember when my daughter was young, we always went to McDonald's because she loved to play in that play gym, in that little thing for hamsters, children. So I would always choose McDonald's. That was a brilliant marketing. And the kids meal, absolutely brilliant. So, and Apple did it too in the early days. They put apples into the schools. They figured if they were in the schools, that eventually they can get them into the high schools. And if they were there, the students graduating would want an apple in business. So go after kids. It's a proven technology. Steal the kids, the parents will follow. I don't mean literally to steal the kids. There's laws against that. But I mean, get their attention. So we know we got to go after kids, parents, families, schools. Great. So you use the 5 Ws. What do kids like to do? Well, we know the kids like to play, right? And this isn't rocket science. This isn't brilliance. We all know the answers to these questions. So then I asked, what do kids like to play with? Toys. Actually, toys, more so than anything else. They can do stuff on the iPad and on computers, but they really like tactile toys, something that's real. Now, being that I had no budget, I couldn't advertise, and the only thing really that I can get out to a lot of people without actually paying was the internet, right? So the only practical form of marketing that I had available to me was the internet. So then I said, okay, I have to create something that kids would want to play with that's tactile, that's real, tangible, and I have to use the internet to do that. So the final question is, what is it that's connected to your computer? It's the only thing that's connected to your computer that creates something tangible, something you can pick up and hold in your hands. Well, it's your printer. Your printer takes information off of your computer and turns it into paper. So then I thought, what if I could take and create a toy over the internet that could be distributed over the internet? So I did this. I was working with San Diego International Airport. If you go to our website or United's website and click on the PDF, that would then download and print. You can see that in the center, just printed on a standard all-over office computer printer. And then with a little glue and some scissors, you can actually build it into an 11-inch wingspan Boeing 737 that looked identical to a United Airlines airplane. Wow, that's kind of a crazy idea. So I approached United Airlines, and I'm going to read this to you. What if I could create a specialty advertising product similar to a t-shirt or a coffee mug with your marketing message and logo, which we can change every 15 minutes, where your customers, who will represent all demographics, men, women, and children, rich and poor, across all cultures and ages, will actually ask for it. And I'll handle the manufacturing, the fulfillment anywhere in the world, 24/7, 365. I'll do it instantly. And each time I fulfill one of these products for you, it will only cost you 10 cents. That's 1/10 of a US dollar. Are you interested? They said, absolutely. T-shirts, coffee mugs, they cost a lot more than 10 cents. Plus, you got to hand them out. You got to warehouse them. You got to manufacture them. You got to ship them. And you'll handle all that. Yes. And we gave out these airplanes. Now, here's the problem. 30 days into this, I got a call from United Airlines in Chicago, and they said, we can't continue this because we ran out of money. I said, why? It's only 10 cents. And they said, because we had 750,000 downloads. I'm going to give you time to think about that. 750,000 times it was downloaded. So that meant in US, $75,000 they owed me at a dime a piece. And we eventually just didn't do that. But look at the success. So eventually, I did contracts with Ford, General Motors, 3 contracts with General Motors, Kia, Department of Interior, British Airways. And we created these downloadable replicas of their products so that anybody can go to the website, click on it, download it, and build it. Isn't that cool? There's no fulfillment, there's no manufacturing, and if the kid wrecks it, he builds another one. But when he builds it, he's so proud. He's going to fly that in front of his dad's face or his mom's face just before they go on that next business trip. Guess which airline they're going to use. So it turned out to be a company that generated over 50,000 customers and over $1 million in revenue over the last 20 years. And you actually figured it out along with me just by answering those simple questions. So here's the bottom line. I've given you the tools. Everybody's got the same tools. Everybody has the same abilities. It's up to you now whether or not you want to practice being creative. being that everybody has access to exactly the same tools, there's only one thing that's going to set you aside from everybody else, and that is innovation, creativity. Because you have to use the tools that everyone has, but you got to use them in a completely different way, in a way that nobody thought of. This will teach you how to do this. And this will add to your bottom line, and it will solve problems. The more you practice it, the better you'll become. Thank you for sitting through this. Now we're going to open it up to questions. We'll have those typed in the box here. Remember, I'm like a private consultant that you don't have to pay. Any questions that you have, absolutely, just ask me those questions. Oh, the slides. Remember that this presentation will be available on demand from the Moscow Business College. Thank you very much, Moscow Business College, and all of your staff for supporting this and sponsoring this presentation. If you want copies of the slides, just go to lonsafko.com, first name, last name.com. There's a black bar and it says get access. Put in your email address, you get a password, and you can actually download all of these slides. And I recommend that you do. And do it right now immediately so that you can practice this while what I've said is still fresh in your head. And print them as a reference. Okay, do we have any other questions? Okay. If anybody does have any questions after seeing this, by all means, contact the Moscow Business College. They're happy to answer any questions. And also contact me, just Lon Safko at lonsafko.com. And I am absolutely happy to answer any questions that you have. So if there's no further questions, then I would like to thank everybody for coming out today. I really appreciate your time. And let's get creative. And a special thanks goes out to the Moscow Business College for sponsoring this. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure working.